Imagine this. You are 19 years old. You have never left your homeland. Everything you know about the world comes from your village, your family, your uniform, and the stories repeated to you since childhood. You were taught that America is a land of monsters, a place without honor or culture, ruled by violence, greed, and moral decay. You were told that Americans hate you, that they will torture you, humiliate you, or kill you without mercy. Now imagine waking up in the darkness of a ship, surrounded by hundreds of other defeated soldiers, the air heavy with sweat and fear, the sound of the ocean echoing through metal walls. You do not know where you are going. You do not know how long the journey will last. You only know one thing. You are a German soldier. You have been captured by the enemy, and you are being taken to the United States of America. For many of these young men, that moment felt worse than death. What none of them could imagine was that this journey would become one of the most transformative experiences of their lives, forcing them to confront not only their enemy, but everything they had been taught to believe. By 1942, the Second World War had entered a brutal and unforgiving phase. The early confidence of the German army was beginning to collapse under the weight of reality. In North Africa, battles like El Alamein shattered the myth of German invincibility. Entire units were surrounded, cut off, and forced to surrender. Thousands of soldiers who had marched confidently into war now found themselves disarmed, exhausted, and staring at an uncertain future. At the same time, Allied forces were advancing through Italy, and preparations were already underway for a massive invasion of Western Europe. With every Allied victory came an unexpected logistical nightmare. Prisoners. Tens of thousands of them. Britain was overwhelmed and lacked the space and resources to house such enormous numbers. Keeping prisoners in North Africa was risky, unstable, and dangerous. Housing them near active battle zones was a constant security threat. The solution, though controversial, was clear. The United States, far from the front lines, industrially powerful, and relatively untouched by the physical destruction of war, would take responsibility. By the end of World War II, more than 370,000 German prisoners of war would be held on American soil. It would become one of the largest prisoner relocation operations in history, and yet one of the least discussed. To understand the terror these soldiers felt, it is essential to understand what they believed about America before they ever saw it. Nazi propaganda had been relentless. From schools to newspapers, from radio broadcasts to youth organizations, a single narrative was repeated again and again. America was portrayed as a nation without tradition or honor, obsessed with money and entertainment, racially chaotic, morally corrupt, and fundamentally hostile to everything German soldiers stood for. Hollywood films were banned or censored. Foreign radio was restricted. The same images and stories were reinforced daily. According to this worldview, capture by the British was harsh, but survivable. Capture by Americans, however, was something far worse. Many soldiers genuinely believed they would be tortured, forced into brutal labor, or executed. Some believed they would never return home. When Allied officers informed captured Germans that they were being transported to the United States, reactions were immediate and intense. Some broke down crying. Some prayed quietly. Others became completely silent, staring into nothing. A small number even attempted suicide, convinced they were being sent to a fate worse than death. The journey across the Atlantic was long, claustrophobic, and psychologically devastating. Prisoners were loaded onto ships already crowded with troops and supplies. Below deck, conditions were cramped and dark. The smell of sweat, oil, and fear filled the air. Conversations were whispered. Every sound mattered. Every vibration of the hull triggered the same terrifying thought. Are we under attack? The Atlantic Ocean was a battlefield. German submarines hunted Allied ships relentlessly, and Allied escorts responded with equal force. The prisoners knew this. Many feared dying at sea, killed not by the enemy who captured them, but by a torpedo meant for someone else. For weeks, they lived in a state of constant anxiety. Some later said the crossing was worse than combat itself. In battle, at least, you could act. Here, there was nothing to do but wait. When the ships finally reached American ports, something unexpected happened. There were no beatings, no screaming crowds, no revenge. Instead, there were procedures. Guards followed clear rules. Medical checks were conducted. Food was distributed. Prisoners were registered, assigned numbers, and processed with an efficiency that felt strangely impersonal. Many were confused. This was not the America they had been warned about. From the ports, they were placed on long trains and sent deep into the interior of the country. For days, sometimes weeks, They traveled across landscapes unlike anything they had ever seen. Endless plains, vast forests, mountains that seemed to stretch forever, small towns, farms, cities. The scale of the country was overwhelming. Through small windows, prisoners caught glimpses of ordinary American life. Children playing, farmers working fields, people going about their days as if the war were a distant rumor. For men who had spent years under constant bombardment, this calm felt surreal. The prisoner camps themselves were scattered across the United States. From Texas to Wisconsin, from Arizona to New York, more than 500 camps were constructed. Some were large, housing thousands of prisoners. Others were small satellite camps near farms and factories. The camps were surrounded by fences and guard towers, but inside, life was far more structured than many expected. The United States followed the Geneva Convention closely. Prisoners received adequate food, medical care, and shelter. They were allowed to write letters home. They could organize sports, music groups, and educational classes. For many, the shock was profound. They had expected brutality. Instead, they found order. Not all prisoners reacted the same way. Among them were hardened Nazis who remained fiercely loyal to Hitler and the regime. These men enforced discipline inside the camps, intimidating and sometimes attacking fellow prisoners who showed signs of cooperation or ideological doubt. Secret Nazi courts were held in barracks at night. Those accused of disloyalty were beaten or threatened. In response, American authorities eventually separated the most radical prisoners into special camps. But for many others, something quieter and more dangerous to the Nazi worldview was happening. Exposure. Exposure to a society that did not match the propaganda. Exposure to guards who treated them professionally. Exposure to newspapers, books, and conversations that slowly chipped away at years of indoctrination. Prisoners were also put to work. The United States faced severe labor shortages as millions of American men fought overseas. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war could be required to perform non-military labor. German prisoners worked on farms, harvested crops, cut timber, and worked in canneries and factories. In rural areas, they lived among American civilians, often under minimal supervision. Many farmers were skeptical at first. These were enemy soldiers, after all. But necessity changed attitudes. Over time, relationships developed. Prisoners ate meals with families. They learned English. They exchanged stories. Some Americans were surprised to discover that the men they had been taught to hate were young, frightened, and deeply human. For many prisoners, these interactions planted seeds of doubt. They began to question the image of America they had grown up with. They noticed contradictions. If Americans were supposed to be cruel, why were they fair? If democracy was weak, why did this society seem so stable? If propaganda had lied about the enemy, what else had it lied about? These questions did not lead to immediate answers, but they lingered. They followed prisoners back to their bunks at night. They appeared in quiet conversations. They grew stronger as months turned into years. By the time the war in Europe ended in 1945, many German prisoners were no longer the same men who had surrendered years earlier. Some remained loyal to Nazi ideology, but many others had undergone a slow, painful transformation. They had seen another way of life. They had experienced fairness from an enemy they had been taught to fear. For some, returning to a defeated and devastated Germany would be a shock greater than captivity itself. In later years, former prisoners would describe their time in America not as imprisonment, but as an education that changed their understanding of the world, of politics, and of themselves. And yet, this was only the beginning of their story. What happened when they returned home would reshape post-war Germany in ways few could have predicted. The experience of captivity in America would echo far beyond the fences of those camps, influencing ideas, rebuilding lives, and quietly shaping the future of a defeated nation.